Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Black Lives Matter in the Classroom, a conversation with experts. So, before I get into introducing our wonderful panelists, I just wanted to acknowledge the powerful meaning of this day, and we are incredibly excited to share the insights and expertise from our panelists on this momentous occasion of change and renewal. And it's a new era of hope, empathy, and especially our first female Black and Asian vice president, as well as an educator who is our first lady. So, thank you for taking the time out of this inauguration day to learn about Black Lives Matter and how we can initiate change. And for those of you who purchased copies of What We Believe, we were overwhelmed with the number of orders. So thank you so much. But we are working through them. Thank you for your patience. Both print and any outstanding ebook purchases should be sent out by the end of this week. And we have been in touch with those of you who are waiting for missing addresses for. So just a few logistical things before we begin. This webinar is being recorded. The link to view the webinar and the anti-racism book list, which I'll talk about towards the end of the webinar, will be shared within the week, as well as some of the resources and information about where to purchase the books. You can also contact me, kpotter@leonlow.com, for certificate of completion at the end of this webinar. And so we'll talk first about our bios and introductions. I'll have all of our panelists introduce ourselves. Then we'll give brief summaries about the books. We'll do some book deep dives and learn more about our authors' inspirations. We'll talk about Black Lives Matter in schools and libraries, how to engage with families at home, addressing resistance and pushback, and we'll conclude with a question and answer. So I'm Katie Potter. I'm the Senior Literacy Specialist at Laleña Books. Some of you may have seen me from previous webinars. I write and develop the teacher's guides and educator resources for our titles here at Laleña Books. I also work with universities and nonprofit organizations on how to incorporate diverse books into their respective programs. And prior to Laleña, I was a former teacher, educational researcher, and I have my master's in literacy and childhood general education from Bank Street College of Education. And now on to Laleña.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laleña. When you talk about me, the words that feel good to me are she and her. I live in Brooklyn. I teach at a private school on the Upper West Side. I'm currently teaching from my house in Brooklyn, teaching 5- and 6-year-olds virtually. It's been a wild ride. I also went to Bank Street and graduated in 2002. Seems like a million years ago. Yeah, and so I teach kids and I also teach grownups. So I run classes with the New York State Professional Development Institute as a gender and sexuality trainer. And I run my own classes about Black Lives Matter and putting them into a historical context as we think about what we're going to do with very young children and also the work that we need to do on ourselves as grownups. So that's me.
Thanks, Laleña.
Mm-hmm.
And next we have Caryn.
Hey everyone, I'm Caryn Davidson. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and I'm in my 17th year of teaching visual art. I started at Fannie Lou Hamer Middle School in the South Bronx as a founding teacher there. A couple of my fellow founding teachers of Fannie Lou Hamer are in the book. There are a couple portraits of them and their kids. And then I taught at the High School for Global Citizenship in partnership with Global Kids. That was like the golden years of my career. And I developed a lot of anti-racist social justice curriculum and strategies at that school. And so it's just such a thrill for my artistic life to be merging with my activist and educator life. And I'm honored to be here.
And next we have Denisha.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Denisha Jones. I use she, her, and her pronouns. I currently work full-time as the director of the Art of Teaching program at Sarah Lawrence College. I've been doing teacher education for a very long time, but my heart started where it always originated, was in preschool. I was a kindergarten teacher and a preschool director before I wanted to spend all my time really looking at how we prepare teachers, and I've been doing that amazing work for almost 20 years. And I'm also really excited to be a part of the National Steering Committee for Black Lives Matter at school, and I work with the New York City Steering Committee as well. I'm an advocate and an activist. I work as the co-director for Defending the Early Years, and work with a lot of grassroots education organizations, including the Badass Teachers Association, Network for Public Education. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thanks, Denisha. And Jesse is going to be joining us in a little bit, but this is Jesse Hagopian's bio. You can read a little bit about him here and his very extensive career. So we're thrilled to have Jesse join us in a little bit. And now we'll dive into some of our book talks, and Laleña and Caryn will talk a little bit about what we believe.
So I'm really excited to tell you all about this book, because this book began with actually me hearing about the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action from friends of mine who had gone to Free Minds, Free People. If you are an educator, you should go to Free Minds, Free People. It is an education for liberation conference, and it is the best, most inspiring, most invigorating conference I have ever been to. So this is just a shout out to that. And one of the things that I feel like is really supported at things like Free Minds, Free People is talking to little people about big ideas. Because sometimes grownups are uncomfortable talking about something, but that's because we've learned to be uncomfortable. And kids are not uncomfortable. And so bringing this work to my classroom actually felt like exactly what I had learned at Bank Street, exactly what I had learned to do at the School for Children, exactly what I've learned to do at Manhattan Country School, which is where I teach now, which is founded on the principles of social justice. So putting all this together has been wonderful. And we're going to get to see a few of my kids later on. Caryn, do you want to talk about the engagement and the art a little bit? Like how this part came?
Sure. Yeah. When I showed up to the Black Lives Matter at School organizing meetings, I started designing visuals, and I was very inspired to. And I also started applying some of my student art to some of these posters that align with the principles. So art was just kind of coming forth from me in that localized organizing, and then Laleña and I were able to collaborate and create the coloring book, which is now the published activity book. And so originally the portraits were actually of my friend Caryn and another friend's child, Sekou, and then sprinkled with some activists. And the vision, we were going to write a children's book, and I was inspired by my friends and their children to feature them in the children's book. And when we were developing the coloring book instead, I really wanted to integrate contemporary activists, because the idea behind this book is that it is visionary. It is using the Black Lives Matter principles to create the world that we wish to see, right? And so instead of reacting to the horrors of racism, where we're creating unapologetically beautiful worlds that center Black women and trans and queer folks. And so so in terms of featuring activists, I just really wanted to feature people who embody those principles, who live them, for whom saying Black Lives Matter is obviously a given. And so it's like the universe in which it's completely absurd and nonsensical to say or to question whether Black Lives Matter. So yeah, so it's for young people to see that there are people in the world uplifting your rights and protecting you and celebrating you. And those are these people.
Thank you, Caryn.
Yeah.
That's really helpful background information. And now on to Denisha.
Thanks, you guys. So it was really exciting when we started doing this work right after Free Mind, Free People in 2017 in Baltimore, and we went national with the Black Lives Matter Week of Action. And then it was after the 2018 week of action, right after the steering committee got together, and we invited everyone who participated to a webinar to tell us how the week went and to hear about all the amazing activities. And just listening to those stories moved me. I mean, there were so many activities across the country, even postponed activities, because they got a lot of snow in Washington State that year. So they had to postpone half of their week of activities to the next week, right? But we still got to hear of all the just amazing work. And I just knew in this moment that we had to share these stories. This book, Black Lives Matter at School, an Uprising for Educational Justice, is about the stories of the amazing people who make this movement happen every year. And I reached out to Jesse and I said, we gotta turn this into a book. It's just, there's so much great stuff happening, right? I was already enamored with the artwork from the posters and the principals and all of that, but just hearing all the stories. So Jesse agreed that it was a great idea. Hey, Jesse, welcome. I'm just telling them about how this idea came. And so we reached out to Haymarket and they said, yes, absolutely. We thought it would be a tale of each city telling the story of how they put the work together, but what it turned out was more different aspects of the work that come together. So the introduction really going over the movement and the history, talking about the work of youth in the unions, because that's a big part of most of the K through 12 teachers who work in this book, and then the teachers who do the work in their classrooms and the youth. It wouldn't have been complete if we didn't have a great section about youth voices. And so there's over 30 contributors in this book. And so I really want people to know it's their story, it's our story. We start doing this, I don't know, August, September. Now that it is Year of Purpose, we're never going to stop doing this. I think we all agreed that we're going to continue to have monthly meetings throughout the year, but typically we would start around August and September and we go hard through February making this happen. And it's been a labor of love, and we just wanted to share it with you.
Hey, Jesse, you want to share? Sorry, everyone, Jesse's here. So Jesse, did you want to add anything?
Sure. Thank you so much. I was just coming from a school event, so I appreciate your patience with me. And it's wonderful to get to join you all. And I just want to start by giving a big congratulations to Caryn and Laleña, who made such a beautiful book and such an important resource for our youth. And it's exciting that both of our books are coming out at the same time, because educators now have these two great resources to help guide them in the struggle to make Black Lives Matter at our schools. And it was one of the great joys of my life to work on this book with Denisha. And I just want to also thank Denisha for reaching out to me and saying, hey, we should do this book. You want to collaborate on it. And I think just the most incredible part of our new book, Black Lives Matter at School, is just the diversity of voices across the country. And to me, the real crown jewel of the book is the student voices, hearing from the youth who have been building this rebellion for many years, about what motivates them, I think will motivate us all to uproot institutional racism and anti-Blackness in education and transform our school system. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jesse. So now we're going to talk, we heard a little bit about both of the books, and now we're going to talk more about the author's inspiration and learn a little bit more about their processes. But before we get in, we're going to be talking a lot about the guiding principles of Black Lives Matter at School, which Laleña and Jesse will take us through a little bit about the importance of these and about the distinction between Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter at School.
Yeah, so when I went to my first organizing meeting, one of the things that really struck me was how these guiding principles are so similar to the way that early childhood educators create their classroom environments. And I thought, well, obviously, the first thing I'm going to do is put these into kids-friendly language, because kids are so ready for this work. And early childhood educators are doing this work already. Mm-hmm. It is already happening. And I know that sometimes we really, like I said, get scared about talking to little kids about big ideas, but that's because we've internalized stories that are not true. We've internalized systems of capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy that make us uncomfortable. Kids have not yet internalized those stories, and it's our job to help them interrupt those narratives. And so when I looked at these principles, I thought, these are going to seem to children like, duh, Like, obviously, if you knock over someone's block building, you cannot just say sorry and walk away. You have to help them fix the problem. Kids know that. They're really ready for that. And we can give them words to talk about that. We can say, oh, friends, it looks like you need some restorative justice. And I can tell you that kids understand these ideas. They don't question them. And I think that what's powerful is that these are not ideas that are about what do we do when there's police violence. These are ideas about how do we build a just, compassionate society? What is the framework for ourselves as citizens of a just world? And these principles give us that framework. They give us a blueprint. And kids are really ready for that. When they think about how to make their classroom a fair place, and we talk about, well, what do all kids need at school? How do we make sure our classroom is fair? How do we make sure our classroom is safe? What are the rules we need? These principles fit in with all of that work that so many teachers are already doing. And I feel like that is why this speaks so much to me as an early childhood educator, and the ways that I see kids think, oh yeah, of course, like my kids' faces light up when we talk about Black Lives Matter, and they say brilliant things. And it's always humbling to hear a 5-year-old explain the school to prison pipeline in a few words. And I can talk about that when we get later to the demands, but it's really, it is so astonishing the way that children understand equity, and then the ways that we as a society teach them to do mental gymnastics to believe that capitalism is okay, to believe that white supremacy is okay, to believe that patriarchy is okay. That's not how they start out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Laleña. Wow.
Yeah, no doubt. And you did a brilliant job translating these principles into kid-friendly language. And, I use it with my high school students as well. They love your activity book and they want to do more coloring, and it makes it straightforward for how they can relate their lives to these principles. So that is much appreciated. And I forgot who said it, but there's a meme going around that said, if Black kids are old enough to experience racism, then white kids are old enough to learn about it, right? And so this is definitely a conversation that has to start right away with our young kids. And the 13 principles gives us a way to do that. And, it was Tamara Anderson in Philadelphia who brought these 13 principles to the Caucus of Working Educators there and said, we should do a week of action. They were at first inspired by the day of action that we organized in Seattle earlier in the year, and they wanted to expand it to the week of action. And Tamara Anderson said, we should take the principles of the Black Lives Matter Global Network and break them into teaching points for each day of the week. And so we're grateful for Tamara for that inspiration and giving us that framework, and also to Black Lives Matter for creating these in the first place. And, Black Lives Matter at school is not directly affiliated with Black Lives Matter or the Black Lives Matter Global Network, but we're definitely inspired by them and are grateful for the work that they've done to fight against structural racism in our country. And so we're definitely excited to help further that work.
Thank you, Jesse and Laleña. And now we're going to get into some other questions about how we can use these particular books, because although they're similar, they're also quite different in the intended audience. So Laleña and Caryn, could you let us know about how we can use what we believe in the classroom and other educational settings?
Sure. Caryn, do you want me to go first? And I'll talk about little kids and you talk about older kids.
Sounds good.
Great. So what I was just saying about how we establish community norms, right? We talk about what is school, what is our classroom, and we talk about how school is a place where kids and teachers have to be safe. And then we figure out all the different ways that comes up. And we talk about things like identity, and we talk about things like consent, and we talk about things like equity and making sure that everyone gets what they need. And then Black Lives Matter seems like a really natural outgrowth of that. And kids are not surprised that we're talking about it. And we're not suddenly saying, okay, it's February, now we're going to talk about this. This is an ongoing conversation that we have all year long to say that we talk about these things as a community, because these are things that are important to everybody in our community. And so when I talk about the principles, I read a book, I say, all right, friends, we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter. And then I tell them about a principle. And then after we've talked about several of them, that's when I allow them to do the coloring pages, because it's not just like a, here, go do this thing, sit there and be quiet. It's something that I want them to have some engagement with. I want them to have information about it. I want them to know why we're doing it, because I don't think there should be anything that we do in school where kids are like, I don't understand why we're doing this. I think that's like, those are the main things. And in the email that you're going to get is going to be a list of books that I and other New York City educators have used with young children to support each principle as you're thinking about them. And that's also in the teacher's guide that comes with the book. And it's on the website. I'm very excited about it. It's my first teacher's guide that I've ever written. And
amazing.
yeah, and when you're using a book, right, the thing that we have to remember as educators is that read alouds are an entry to a conversation, but they are not a replacement for a conversation. So we have to be ready to have those conversations with our kids about a lot of different things so the kids know the school is a place where we talk about these things. It's really important. So that's how I talk about it with little kids. And the other thing that I'm just going to say now, before I don't forget to say it later, is that in our country, we are not taught to talk about race. So we are not very good at it. So we are all about 5 years old when it comes to talking about race. And I think that's why, Jesse, you're not the first high school teacher who said that he uses my book with their kids.
Right.
So I think it's really important. And it's for us as adults too, because we, like I said, we've internalized all of these really harmful narratives, and we need to make sure that we are giving kids the tools to disrupt them.
Yeah, that leads exactly into what I was going to say, which is that ideally you're not just using this separately in your own isolated classroom. I think that schools need to start the year exploring these principles with all of their staff, and then establishing those community norms among the staff, modeling for each other what it means to create a space that is brave, where you're confronting race, and you're calling out things that are the ways that racism are manifesting around you. And so with high schoolers, the first time I started explicitly using these principles was in my third school, my current school, which is a multiracial school. It was the first school I've ever taught white students in. And so I've only ever explicitly taught these with a multiracial classroom. So for me, providing guidance, when I readily was trying to come up with some tips, I noticed when I first started doing, I'm an art teacher, and it was like, it hadn't been embedded. I do like social justice teaching for art from the beginning of the year. So there were some elements that had been embedded throughout the year, but I certainly, when I started doing it, realized like, I need to do this differently moving forward, as Laleña articulated, and integrate it into the fabric of the class. But what you notice is if you give a lot of choice, it has to be very structured. So if you let kids just freely explore these principles, certain students avoid certain principles. So a lot of white students avoided talking about Black families and Black women because they don't seem to think that it connects to them. And this is a perfect moment for you to, I feel like success of this book, which we're going to talk about later, is definitely helping your students and your colleagues understand how Black Lives Matter relates to all of us, like to the same extent in different ways. So there's anyone who's saying, what does this have to do with me? Whether it's a white student or a Latinx student or an East or South Asian student, like that's what you have to understand as an educator and be able to help explain that racism affects us all equally. And for a lot of people, and Laleña has said this a lot, like for Black people know that Black Lives Matter. But like, unfortunately, we have to do this work to address the fact that has not manifested societally, and systemically, we've seen the opposite. And so, so like just really addressing how racism shows up in your community, however segregated your school is, And every school system is connected to segregation, and you have to talk about how many Black teachers you have in your school, how many Black women teachers do you have, how many Black students are in your classroom and why. Have you ever been in a classroom with a white student and why? I mean, you got to just dive into all of this and create the space where you can talk about it. So for high schoolers, I really, I developed, after doing it once, and I saw a few like kind of happy-go-lucky, like, let's celebrate diversity posters come out of it. I was like, oh no, you have to engage with these very critically. So when you're talking about diversity, you have to talk about segregation. You have to talk about the complexity of diversity within groups. You have to talk about diversity relates to the fact that we can't only have one Black teacher in our school, or there shouldn't be only one Black student in a classroom. And because there's so much intersectionality and diversity that we need to experience all the time. And that's why people are promoting integration right now, even though integration is super hard and messy and ugly. But so I would just say, yeah, when I use it, I'm still figuring it out, and I'm excited to develop additional resources to support teachers doing that. I did create a middle high school activity book that has more textual kind of resources within it that you can use if you want to move conversation along, or to kind of point the principals into, or like ground them in kind of real world and historical examples of liberation efforts. So I don't know, I could talk forever. I'm gonna end there.
Thank you so much, Caryn. And that, I think that's a great segue when Caryn was talking about working with her older students to Denisha and Jesse's book about how to engage with educators and as well as high school students with your book. So if you could talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter at school, Denisha and Jesse, that would be great.
Oh, maybe I'll start with the origin and turn it over to Denisha, because I think it's a story that really needs to be known throughout the country about how this round of struggle for racial justice in our schools really got kicked off. And it started with an elementary school in Seattle, John Muir Elementary. And there's a group of educators in the racial justice caucus there at their school. They wanted to do an event to celebrate their Black students' lives at the very beginning of school, not waiting for February. And this was in 2016. And you have to remember that summer was a brutal summer when we lost the souls of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling to police violence. And so the educators wanted their youth to know from the very beginning of the year that they were loved, that this was a safe place for them where they would be supported, even though there's so much trauma in the world. And so they organized an event with Black Men United to change the narrative and the PTA, and they were going to get all the Black families out front of the school high-fiving the kids on their way in to school that day, and hold a celebration of Black culture and Black history in the auditorium. And the art teacher, Julie Trout, designed a shirt that said, "Black Lives Matter, we stand together," with a picture of a tree with the many branches coming into the one tree trunk in the symbol of solidarity. But then some white supremacists found out that educators were going to be wearing Black Lives Matter shirts to school, and they started bombarding the school with very hateful mail, emails and letters. And then a particularly hateful person made a bomb threat against an elementary school just because they wanted to celebrate their Black students. And so the school district officially canceled the event. They brought in bomb sniffing dogs that morning to find out if it was a credible threat. And, you know, to the credit of the community, they did carry it through with the event anyway, but it was a lot smaller than it would have been, a lot less family participation. And that broke my heart. And I got in touch with my friend Wayne Au, who co-edited the book Teaching for Black Lives with me, and his son went to that school. So he put me in touch with the educators there, and we brought them to a meeting to discuss how we could support them. And we came up with the idea of putting forward a resolution in our union to call for support for John Muir Elementary, but we knew that real solidarity would mean that we all wore the shirts to school, not just passing a resolution. So we called on October 19th, 2016 to be Black Lives Matter at School Day, and we organized a campaign with educators, students, parents, Black Student Union, the NAACP, and a lot of other groups to achieve this day. And we ended up having some 3,000 out of the 5,000 educators come to school wearing the shirts. And that was just this eruption of struggle for Black lives, and that, you know, garnered national attention and spread to Philadelphia. And I want to turn it over to Denisha to talk more about the struggle.
Thanks. I've heard the origin story so much, but I always love it when Jesse tells it because he was part of it, and it's really great. And I think people need to understand that perspective. So we grew into a national movement. As Laleña mentioned, some of us were at Free Mind, Free People in 2017. And I saw the work of the Philadelphia educators when they took it to a week of action. And I asked them to present at the conference, and they did. And then we were able to have a lot of people attend, and other people attended other events across the country as well that were around racial justice in Ferguson. And so that's kind of how this national movement grew. So the book tells the story. It tells the story. It starts with a foreword by one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, Opal Tometi. It also has a great historical narrative perspective by Brian Jones, who tells us a little bit of how we situate our work in the Black Lives Matter school within the struggle for Black liberation. And also Jesse and Wayne Al's story about how this all originated. Then we also talk a little bit about what is it actually? Well, it's a curriculum framework, right? We have lots of curriculum and lots of resources. So Chris Rogers, an educator out of Philadelphia who's been leading up our curriculum committee, he has a chapter talking about what that work looks like and why we curate resources. We just released the 2021 curriculum resources. We do this around Martin Luther King Day weekend every year. So we talk about that. We also talk about organizing at the community level because that's important too. Okaikor Irene Price talks about her work in New Jersey. And I forgot, Tamara Anderson also kicks off that section talking about Philadelphia and how they took a Seattle's Day of Action into a week of action. And so that's a great place to begin, to read this book, to learn what's happening in the stories, and then move on into the other sections. So we know that although I'm not a member of a teachers union, I get that the unions can be a big supporter or a big protractor to this work, depending on where you're at. And so we do include the voices of unions and how they've come on board or how we're still fighting to get them on board. So we hear from Cecily Meyer Cruz out of UTLA. I conducted some interviews with our colleague Myri in New York City and Erica Strauss-Chavarria in Maryland, and about how they work and why they pursue union support. So if you're interested in that aspect, that's a really great place for teachers to dig in if you want to bring this to your school through the union and look at those chapters. And then if you're just a teacher and you want to know what's happening, get into the rest of the book, right? There are lots of chapters from a teacher. I saw a comment in the chat about white teachers. We actually got 4 white teachers to co-author a chapter called White Teachers for Black Lives, right? We know that a lot of this work happens with white teachers who are committed to this movement, but it also takes a lot of work and negotiation that the movement doesn't become whitewashed, right? With white people leading in. So we make a conscious effort that we have an all Black steering committee, right? So that Black voices at the national level are leading this movement. And what I love about my colleague in New York City is that they take direction from the Black folks and then they do what needs to be done. So it's a really good way to learn about that movement. And of course, hearing about the youth. You can have the youth read the sections that the youth wrote. Teachers should read. I will have my students read the section that youth wrote so they can see the story about this work through their eyes as well too. So that's all really important. And there's just so much. We were able to bring in a lot of the work, a lot of things that we shared in the past, so you can hear about different things we were a part of, and also what's happening now. And our current year of purpose, where we always knew this work was more than just a week, but we wanted to use the first week of February to really highlight the movement, but now we want to ground the work of the principles and the demands in the year of purpose. And so we even were able to get in a chapter on that as well too.
Amazing. Thank you, Denisha. And now we're going to hear from all of our panelists together about what Black Lives Matter looks like in schools and libraries.
Just hearing Denisha right now just talk about, like, there's this week and there's also this year, and like, what does that mean? And because I teach 5 and 6-year-olds, and you cannot teach 5 and 6-year-olds anything in a week. Like, you cannot teach them to not pick their noses in a week. You definitely cannot teach them a big idea. So what we do is we talk about the principles all year long. And we talk about the demands during the week of action. And we talk about them as a way of thinking about ourselves as activists. And one of the things that the NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, says is that it's our job as early childhood educators to give kids anti-bias resources and to do identity work with them and to let them know that if something is unfair, it's their responsibility to do something about it. And so that's part of our job as early childhood educators. And so when I say to my kids, I'm like, all right, so, what's an activist? And they're all like, an activist is someone who works together with other people to make the world a better place. And we talk a lot about solidarity and about how you work with other people. So it's not like there's this one person who did one thing one time and then everything changed. Like Rosa Parks was tired and sat on a bus and now everything is fine. That is not what happened. And that's really important that we don't give kids those narratives, but we give them the narratives and the stories and the truth about people working together and supporting each other. And one of the things I tell them is that we have to have demands. Activists' job is to say, this is what we want. We can't just say, this is what we don't want, right? And as teachers, we know this, right? We can't just say, don't run. We have to say, walk. We have to be really clear with what we want. And so kids learn, oh, we have to say what we want. And so for the week of action, we talk about how there are kids and teachers all over the country thinking about these demands, how to make their schools more fair. And the kids are very excited about that. And so we use the principles all year long. And then during that week, we really center the demands and think about how we want all schools to be safe places for all kids and all teachers. And so that has been really successful. Kids feel great about it. It also helps them not feel like it's tokenized, right? Like, oh, we learned about it once and now we never talk about it again, which is how I felt about Black History Month and Women's History Month when I was in school.
Yeah, and so now we're at a place where after last spring, a lot of folks are, being more encouraged to do anti-bias, anti-racist work. A lot of people are saying Black Lives or wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts who never would have before last year. It's trending, so I think that it's really important to make sure that we are, doing very, very vigorous work as I said in the beginning, as schools. And this should be becoming an anti-racist organization it's in the resources at the end. It's we should all be doing that right now and very critically examining all systems within our schools, there's the reflection questions for the Year of Purpose that are on the national website that help you reflect on your classroom and your school and, how is discipline implemented? What would restorative justice look like in your school? And how is Black history taught? So not just that it's taught, obviously, as Laleña was saying, but how it's taught. And so, anti-racism can end up having racist impacts if you don't do it critically. And I've also been developing with many people are already doing, I'm just in my small local world, I'm trying to find language to talk about with my colleagues about more visionary and therapeutic approaches to anti-racism, such that students don't leave your room. So this is why the principles are so great. You have to address the demands and the reality of white supremacy, but you also don't only want to do that because then kids will leave your room in pain. And so how can we transform pain into power? How can we balance the reaction to the world with creation and with vision? So it's really important to make sure that your hidden messages aren't saying you are powerless. And so a lot of that has to do with language, has to do with a lot of things. And certainly in every lesson, and that's why I chose these activists, you want always feature people who are alive and right now and doing the work and embodying these principles. There are millions of people on this earth who are embodying these principles and doing amazing, empowering stuff to uplift Black lives and to protect our rights. So as an art teacher, there's so many amazing artists doing that. So I've just really focused in on contemporary examples of people doing that. And so I would say also just the last point is to be careful about the language. So instead of saying it doesn't matter what color you are, like our principals, Unapologetically Black, et cetera, are saying it does matter. Teachers need to not be colorblind and need to center race and let kids leave there knowing that they matter and that the language used in their class emphasizes that.
Yeah,
Thank you,
absolutely.
yeah, Jesse and Denisha, did you want to elaborate on that and also talk about, maybe provide some anecdotes about how students have been affected by your work about in Black Lives Matter in school?
Yeah, I thought I'd just read a quick couple sentences from some of the students in the book about their experience of Black Lives Matter at school. This is from Israel Presley, who was a student of mine in my world history class and in my ethnic studies class. And he says, during the week of action, I learned that Blackness could be part of every subject in school. I was finally being taught things about myself. I learned about Black contributions to science in science class. I had a math teacher at Garfield who did excellent work, Miss Din. She didn't use math to talk about the negative statistics about Black people. No, she used math to talk about the possibilities that we could achieve. It felt very powerful.
Wow.
Right? And I think that's what Caryn was talking about, moving towards also talking about Black joy and not just our oppression. And so I think also one of the great joys of this week of action for me was last year when a great educator at Garfield High School named Alex Ray and I worked together with a whole series of teaching artists to create a mural that was across the hall from the library. And these teaching artists did an incredible job working with our youth at Garfield to ask them what is important from the Black past that is often forgotten that we want to show in this mural. And then what is your vision for a liberated Black future? And out of those conversations came some incredible images that they then spent the week painting, and they got the mural done by the last day of the week of action. And now we have a monument to Black Lives Matter at school in my high school.
Amazing.
Denisha, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I know we were talking about libraries, and so I work at university. So the way I participate in the week of action looks really different, right? We don't teach Monday through Friday classes. I always bring it into all of my classes. Doesn't matter what I'm teaching, there's a way I'm preparing teachers. But I really was excited. My librarian, when I was at Trinity Washington University, found out about it and came to me and was like, I want to do something and I can do whatever I want because I'm the head librarian. And so it was really awesome. She created this great display. She found all of these books, but she wanted to engage the students at our college. So she created a place where she just asked a question and about how their experiences around race on the college, and they could just write a quick answer. She also let them step into a place in the library and leave a quick video chat. So it was really cool that year that we had all of this information. She was trying to engage the students at the college. I also worked with our graduate counseling student club because it's also National School Counselors Week, usually the first week of February. And so they hosted a workshop with us on our demand about fund counselors, not cops, right? So there's lots of ways to integrate. And I think the library being a place where students can go and talk about Black Lives Matter at school. And I've seen many youth-led discussions at events as well too. And hearing the youth talk about the principles and demands is really, really moving. So yeah, I think working with your librarians is a great way. I know there's an anti-racist librarian group on Facebook that I follow, although I'm not a librarian, but I love reading about the books that they're sharing and the work that they're doing.
Thank you so much, Denisha. And then I'm going to quickly, Laleña and Caryn can quickly share some examples of student artwork. I want to be cognizant of the time. I know we don't have too much time left and we have a lot of questions coming in. So these are some photos that Laleña graciously shared.
Yeah, so the first one that you saw of that little girl with her big smile, they talk about Black joy. That was just the thing that she made randomly in April. It was the thing she was thinking about because the posters are up on the wall. We talk about it all year long. And then this, so up here is some kids interacting with the coloring book as Caryn and I originally made it. And then this kid right here, this was in, I want to say April or May. And the work time choice was colored tape and scissors. It's a fine motor activity. And this is what this kid did. No one told her to do that, but this is what she was thinking about. And I know that she was thinking about all of the principles all year long. And kids will say things like, that kid just needed some transgender affirming, or that book reminds me of restorative justice, and this is why. And kids use it in their language. And because it's up all the time, they understand that it's not a thing for a day or a week, but they're there glowing.
Yeah. I know I was seeing in some of the chat, like there's such a spectrum of where people are at. So in terms of like not being allowed to even utter the words Black Lives Matter or wear a BLM t-shirt, to a place, you know, there's like neoliberal moderate places that want to just celebrate diversity, but not really dive into anything. So wow, like I think a lot of people need a lot of different kinds of supports, and that's why the like localized movements, you know, like in New York City, we're really trying to target, you know, policies that are urgent for us, and we do curriculum shares to provide as many resources as possible to a range of teachers. So we have a curriculum share coming up in New York City, FYI, on this coming weekend. So yeah, just wanted to say, yeah, I can talk more. And I'll post on my blog more information about those visuals too.
So we can talk, we've really talked a lot about successful implementation of Black Lives Matter in schools. Because I want, with the chat and with all of these questions coming in, if it's okay with you all, I'm going to go to the next slide about engaging with families, because this might answer a lot of questions that have come in about how, for example, one of them is how can parents advocate for making discussions like this a priority at school? So I think this is really timely, and people who are tuned in with us now really would love to know from you four.
I mean, I think that what I often hear is I hear teachers say, I'm worried about parents, and the parents are like, how do I get you to do this? I think that there is more, I think we have more allies than we think we do. And I think we need to look for them and find them and figure out who in our community can have our back. And I talk about this a little bit in the teacher's guide for this book, but like, think about it, find out who cares about these things also, because there's nothing worse than someone who's like, well, I'm not doing this because I'm afraid. And someone's like, I wish my teacher would do this, but I don't know how to get them, right? So that's there. But when you say, hey, we're going to talk about social justice and identity, you can let them know. I write my parents a letter every week that just talks about what we're doing and what we're going to do. Whenever we have a conversation, I include quotes from kids. This is stuff that many teachers do, and we just kind of have to target it. And I have found that being clear about it ahead of time so people are not shocked is really helpful. And then also letting your administration know so that they can have your back. That's really important. And then I don't remember if we're going to talk about this later, but one thing I always say is, you know, look at your mission statement. Go back to your mission statement. Does your mission statement say anything about supporting all children, making children feel safe, equity, social justice, moral compass, any of those things? You can use that. And if you're like, this is what I'm doing to support our school's mission statement, and because I am an educator of young children and the National Association for the Education of Young Children says that I have to do anti-bias education, et cetera, sometimes that just gives us some of the authority that we feel like we need, because we are experts in children. And that's something that we need to remember. Like, we are experts in teaching children how to read and how to write and how to do math. And we are going to become experts at teaching children about their identity and how to talk about their identity in the world that they live in. And so we have to make sure that we use what we know about children as we are engaging in new subjects.
That was beautiful. Like, because the title of this event is a conversation with experts. Like, we're always becoming experts. What does it mean to be an expert, right? But certainly, you know, ensuring that teachers who are talking about race have the adequate training and support, I guess, depending on what the community is and who the teacher is. But engaging with families quickly, I would just say, if you can disseminate resources, however you do, you could share the Year of Purpose resources with your parents and students. We've been trying to highlight like one of the many amazing resources that are shared nationally. So there's like a Padlet of amazingness, and you can kind of uplift one thing. So for people who are really busy and just like don't have time, or maybe are resistant, or and don't have the will to do it, that like you kind of highlight this one video or this one thing when you send out the link to the additional resources to the community.
Great, thanks, Caryn. And Denisha and Jesse, I want you both to talk about addressing resistance, particularly, your roles in the National Steering Committee, as well as maybe some other anecdotes about that you've had, or that you want to share about any resistance that you've encountered in your journey.
Yeah, I mean, resistance is going to happen because there's no more three scary words right now than Black Lives Matter, right? And we have to call it what it is. And, I have people all the time, well, how am I going to say that at my school? And I'm like, why can't we say that? Why can't, I as a Black person, or you as a non-Black person, just say those three words? So I think we have to name it. And I think you said this one time in a workshop, Laleña, that we did, right? Just name it for what the resistance is. It's racism, right? It is acts and racist acts and racist thinking. And we have to let people to know if you're resisting that, that's the problem, right? It doesn't make the kids uncomfortable. The kids get it, right? I've seen 3 and 4-year-olds smiling and singing songs and looking at me saying, Black Lives Matter. I'm like, you're right, they do. They totally get it. They're not the resistant ones. They're not the one that says, no, this doesn't feel right. This is uncomfortable, right? And so we at the national level, we do our best to support anyone who's feeling the resistance. We'll publish, we'll write, statements together to support people who are getting pushed back in their schools and districts. We'll even contact schools and districts, right? I think it was this summer, one district in Utah was thinking about banning the words Black Lives Matter within the school district. And by the time they were done getting all the emails and the calls, they quickly said, we were never going to do that, because they felt the pressure, right? So at the national level, we'll totally put the pressure on people, and we'll totally expose that kind of thinking and that pushback. But really, it's getting support. And so we have a great chapter in the book, chapter 13, by Makai Kellogg, who's a preschool teacher in DC, who was trying to organize the first time around at her school and realized that she had to work to bring her teachers along, right? That's the title of the chapter, right? Bringing them along for solidarity. And so I even went, because I used to live in DC, and I went and spoke to her teachers and her administrators, really explain the movement and what we're trying to do and why we're doing it. And so that helped, right? And so you don't want to be the only person doing this in your school, right? So you want to try and get support as you can and get others involved. But there are times when this work has to happen outside of the schools, because maybe your district is so resistant. Well, then look for community organization outside, right? Sometimes it happens, right? My colleagues in Maryland, one time, they did the whole week of action working with businesses and communities outside the school, and the youth were able to take over and do that because the school district was being a little resistant. And then they see that they're not a part of it when we're talking about it, and they're like, come back next year. And they're like, oh, well, maybe we can host some events, right? So it's just constant, not being alone, knowing your stuff, like really understanding what's happening at your school, the discipline rates, right? The special ed over placement, all of the things that are threatening Black lives at your school, and being able to talk about that and say, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing as educators. And so we encourage you to reach out, to email us, and to share your story and making your voice heard. And that's really important in pushing back.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just briefly, I'll add that the idea that it's Black Lives Matter that's politicizing our schools is outrageous when you look at the rampant white supremacy in our society and in our textbooks, right? And so, or you can look at the fact that they opened a $200 million youth jail a few blocks from the high school where I teach. And that's a political act that they decided, rather than invest $200 million in nurses and counselors and school psychologists and the things that would help our Black kids and all of our children, they invested it in the school to prison pipeline. And if education isn't helping students think critically about their world, then can we really call it education, right? And so Black Lives Matter is about helping unlock our students' minds in a society that would rather just lock them up.
Wow.
Can I just say for a minute that this idea that oppression is good for anybody is false. White supremacy hurts everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Patriarchy hurts everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Transphobia and homophobia hurt everybody. It is not about those kids. It is about all of us and our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk to young children, they get it. And it takes a lot of work to make us forget it. And I think what we need to do as educators is to hold on to that understanding of humanity and to hold on to the understanding of equity, that everybody gets what they need. And fair is not always equal, but everybody gets what they need. And that we do not hurt other people because that also hurts us. If you've ever watched a kid hit another kid and see that other kid cry and watch that first kid's face, they don't like it either. Oppression is not okay for anybody.
Thank you, Laleña.
Sorry, I just like yell about it all the time.
No, I think that's a great segue into resources, because educators who are listening, educators, librarians, families who are listening in are going to need to start the work if they haven't already. And these are the resources that that Denisha, Laleña, Jesse, and Caryn have all shared. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There are plenty more, but this is a good place to start. And please take a picture of this. And again, you'll see this in the recording when we send it out next week. And we're also really excited to share that Laleña, again, has dedicated her time and energy in her incredibly busy schedule to write this wonderful teacher's guide for us. It's really special for us because this is an amazing book that Laleña and Caryn have created for us at Lee and Low. And it's important to note that a lot of what Laleña, Caryn, and Denisha and Jesse, for that matter, well, it's in Laleña's voice and it's her experiences, but a lot of the sentiments that have been evoked in this webinar are present in this guide. So it's for free on our website. We also offer teacher's guides for almost every single title. So check them out on our book pages. They have plenty of discussion questions, interdisciplinary activities, and more.
I think that all of the resources are also at the end of that teacher's guide.
Yes, the book list and everything that Laleña and her fellow New York City teaching colleagues created is at the end. Yeah, so keep scrolling through and you'll see Laleña and her colleagues have amazingly paired picture books to go along with the principles. So that's also a great.
And it's also got links to like the New York State early learning guidelines. So if you're a teacher in New York State, you can use these guidelines if you need some authority for a pushback, and also the National Association for the Education of Young Children for anybody in our country who's a teacher of young children. So all of that is in this guide that is free on the internet that you can just find. So you don't have to worry about quickly writing it all down now, because that's how I always feel. I'm like, oh no.
Right. This is also our anti-racism reading list. That's also available for free. If you want some other picture book ideas, it's pre-K through 8 and up. We have a collection on our website, and there's also a free PDF. It's also going to be sent out in the email. So be sure to check it out. So we are almost at 5 o'clock. I really want to be aware of people's time. So I'm going to pick 2 questions. But before we go into the question and answer, because one of the question is people want to hear more from you. They loved you. They want to know if you do speaking engagements. So maybe if while you're talking about your website and your handles, if you do speaking engagements, what that looks like, that would be great.
Oh, I guess I'll go because my picture's first. Yes, I do speaking engagements. I'm also teaching kindergarten full-time right now. So I want to be really clear about all we know right now is that everything's unpredictable. So if you do want to reach out to me and talk to me about coming to your school or whatever, there's information on my website about all the information that I need from you, just so that we can have productive conversation, and also to be very realistic that teaching online takes even more time than teaching in person, which takes a lot of time. So this summer I might have some time. And I'm also teaching a class that you can sign up for on my website. So I'm a little bit booked, but I do have some availability as time goes on, but we'll see. No promises.
I would encourage you to find your local Black Lives Matter at School organization if you are not already connected to it, or become a part of the creation of it. It's a coalition of educators, parents, local organizers, and it's a really integral space if you're trying to engage in this work. So that's where you can connect to the resources available locally. If you can't, reach out to us. And I give so much of my energy to my local community and the demands as they manifest in my school campus. And I just encourage everybody to do that. But I mean, of course, my email's on my website, or message me if you still want anything from me. I don't know.
So Caryn, you are working a lot. I'm just gonna sit there, like, right in front of all of these people, because Caryn is not only working with the New York City Steering Committee, she is also making so much of the art for the National Committee. Wow. And I am working with Caryn a lot, and I know she's doing a lot of stuff. So Caryn, I feel like you have to do everything.
I call her our resident artist, just doing all the art for the Year of Purpose. It's amazing. And so, yes, to second that, you could reach out to us. I did drop the link, the email in the chat, but if you go to the website, blacklivesmatteratschool.com, you're going to see all the upcoming events. The only good thing about COVID for the Week of Action is that it'll be mainly virtual. And so you can attend the New York City Curriculum Share this weekend. You can attend the DC Curriculum Share next weekend. You can attend any virtual event in any city during the Week of Action. So we are eagerly awaiting all of the cities to send us their beautiful calendars. We will post them on our website. We will share them on social media, and we invite you to reach out. I have so many people reaching out about book clubs, discussions. I can't do them all, but I'll try and pop in and say a few words and get you guys started. And we have other contributors from the book that we can also get together to do a panel. If you want to bring a group to your school, contact us, and we'll definitely try and work that out. But it is, I got to learn to say no at some point. Otherwise, I won't have a day off until.
No.
I'm with you, Denisha. Yeah. You can hit me up on my website, I'm an educator, or on Twitter there. But I'll second what Denisha said, that there are like 31 contributors to our book, Black Lives Matter at School. And so there's an incredible wealth of educators, students, activists, parents who we can draw on to speak at events around the country. So I would definitely say, check out all these wonderful students that could be part of the panels as well.
That's a great point, Jesse. We have time for one question. Unfortunately, possibly maybe we could talk about revisiting a blog post, maybe that if you all, we'll see. I know so many of you had many, many questions. One thing that we didn't really get to, and that I want to pose to the four of you, and if we could try to answer it, in 3 minutes or less. Do you have tips on teaching the queer affirming and transgender affirming principles when you know that some families and other teachers will call it inappropriate?
This is where I use the NAEYC guidelines, because 2 years ago, Young Children, the magazine that the National Association for Education of Young Children put out, was about gender. And it has so much information about our ethical duty as educators to honor students' gender identity and to honor students' families. And so I feel like that is something that can be very helpful when someone's like, this is not okay. You can say, oh, actually, it is appropriate. We want all families in our school to feel welcome, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want a kid who has 2 moms or 2 dads to feel like our school is not a place for them. Mm-hmm. We don't want people to feel like school is not safe for them. If a child says, this is my gender identity, that's their gender identity. And that's actually our ethical obligation. And so I feel like finding those resources, and the New York State Early Learning Guidelines also are very helpful and really clear about how this is what teachers are supposed to be teaching in school. And I think sometimes people are like, oh, I didn't know that. And I definitely had a parent say to me, oh, I did some research and I found out that lots of schools do this. I thought it was just your agenda. Like, it's not just my agenda. This is my job. My job is to teach in a way that the National Association for Education of Young Children thinks is an okay way to teach young children, because that's who certifies my school. So I think that's a really important thing. And also humanizing things and reminding people that children have an identity. Every child has an identity. Like, every child has a gender. It's not just that girls have gender and non-binary people or trans people have gender. Like everybody has a gender. And it's not just that like Black people or Latino people have race, right? Because it's not about this, like, this is what's normal and this is that other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are a community and everybody in our community should feel safe. And no, I'm not. And someone asked me that, like, are you talking about sex? And I was like, no. But when I talk about a family with a mom and a dad, I'm not talking about what you do in bed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about that there are two people who love each other and are taking care of a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I talk about families that have two moms or two dads, there's a family that loves each other and is taking care of kids and making sure kids are safe. And helping people either have to say, I only think about people who are gay in terms of their sexual practices, which is what many people in this country are taught, and acknowledging it. And I think some people, when they say it, they're like, oh, well, actually, that sounds ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But helping people get to that, and also having your administration support, and also knowing that you have educational organizations behind you. That's a really important thing.
Yeah, just to add on that very briefly, that to teach Blackness means we have to teach it intersectionally, because there isn't one Black experience. That we have to also teach about the Black LGBTQ plus experience and the Black woman experience. And I would just offer this book as another resource, Rethinking Sexism, Gender, and Sexuality for our classrooms.
And I just want to say, we do our students a disservice if we send them out into the world and they don't understand what this is about. They should be mad at their parents and their teachers for not giving them the language to recognize the diversity within our lives and in our gender. Like, they have to be prepared for that. And they are, and they're going to do it. The kids are going to prove us wrong, because this makes complete sense to them. They're like, oh yeah, right, of course, you get to be the gender that you feel is your gender, and no one else gets to tell you to be your gender. Why not, right? And so, I just think, as much as people resist against that, your child is going to be strengthened where that's not going to be an issue for them. It's not going to be uncomfortable for them. They're going to walk into a room and know to say, oh, what's your pronouns? These are my pronouns, and this is how I like you to talk about me. And it's all going to be natural and normal for them. And that's what we want.
And on that note, Denisha, I think that's a great way to conclude. Thank you all so much. The outpouring support that we've received in the chat. Thank you all for engaging with us today. Again, this webinar is being recorded. The link to view the webinar and all of the resources will be shared within the week. You can contact me, kpotter@leeandlow.com, for a certificate. And you can follow Lee and Low on social media. These are all of our different handles. And that's it. So hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, your evening on this inauguration day. I want to thank again my 4 brilliant panelists for sharing such wonderful information and inspiring our community. So thank you all so much. And you'll be hearing from us soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.